Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Gary Parker. Today we have episode 429 from May 19th, 2025. And just going to come out and say it now. I recorded this last week. I am on vacation as you hear this. And so I had to record this about 4 days sooner than I normally would. So first of all, it's going to be a little abbreviated. Second of all, if I missed any major stories or some crazy stuff went down late last week or this weekend, I will cover those in the next news show, and that is why I am not talking about them right now. So we do have a news show for you today. I don't have a whole lot to say ahead of time, so why don't we get right into it? I just have a smaller set of stories for you this week, but some good ones. And actually, we have some good news for you this week. It's nice when we have some good news to pass along. But let's start with the more disturbing stuff. A message out of Canada about millions of Canadians' healthcare data being available for sale to the pharmaceutical industry. Not surprising, but very disappointing. And, we maybe could have suspected it, but now we definitely know for sure, and it's troubling. I've got another story about DOGE, and, again, I know it sounds political, but one of the DOGE guys was hacked. And this is part of the problem with the reckless way that these guys have been doing what they're doing. And I just want to call attention to it because this is an example of how this could go wrong. Also, I did not know about this. I learned about kind of a clearinghouse, a payment clearinghouse for airlines that consolidates a lot of personal flight information in one place. And of course, they are selling that data out the back door, and they're selling it to the government for reasons which I find troubling. So I had not heard about this, so this article will serve to make you aware of it as well. But then we had some good news too. There was a multi-thousand device proxy botnet that was taken down. Google has been asked to pay over $1 billion to Texas over some privacy issues. Denver has decided to stop using license plate reader cameras amid privacy worries. And a jury has ordered the NSO Group, makers of Pegasus spyware, to pay $167 million to WhatsApp users. And finally, we've got, I think, the second installment of my Dragon Hacks tip of the week. It's something simple, straightforward, quick and easy to do. And today we're going to talk about using Signal. So let's get to the news. All right, first up, this is from CBC in Canada, and it's about a troubling report over medical data. Going to the doctor can involve sharing your most personal information, including details about your health, medical history, and prescriptions. It all ends up in your medical record, but a new study by researchers at Women's College Hospital in Toronto found that in some cases, private companies are accessing parts of that data and selling it to pharmaceutical companies. And this is a quote from the study's lead author, Cheryl Spithoff. Cheryl says, quote, "This is really an area where we need transparency," unquote. The study, published in JAMA Network Open, that's a medical journal, examined how the medical record history works in Canada and how patient data flows between different private entities. Through a series of 19 interviews, the researchers concluded, quote, "Chains of for-profit primary care clinics, physicians, commercial data brokers, and pharmaceutical companies work together to convert patient medical records into commercial assets," unquote. Those assets, the study said, are then used to further the interests of the pharmaceutical companies. Spithoff and her colleagues identified two different models. In one, a private clinic sells data to an outside company with personal information like names and birth dates removed. The company then offers to sell or analyze that de-identified information for its clients in the pharmaceutical industry. In the other model, the clinic is a subsidiary of the company collecting the data, giving that company even more direct access to patient information. The study said patients were not included in decisions about how their data was used. And Spithoff says, quote, "We need oversight. What we know from other surveys and interviews with patients is that this is not how they want their data handled," unquote. The study's findings suggest these practices could give the pharmaceutical industry more influence over patient care in Canada. Matthew Herder, director of the Health Justice Institute at Dalhousie University in Halifax, said, "While there may be potential for this kind of data sharing to help patients, there is also a risk that these models will push patient care in a direction that benefits pharmaceutical companies and drives up costs for healthcare systems." And this is a quote from Herder, quote, "All of these things are happening without any degree of transparency. That's why this paper is such an important paper. It's starting to bring to light what's really going on," unquote. The Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada declined to comment on the study itself, but said organizations subject to privacy laws must follow certain rules around safeguarding personal information. While most provinces and territories have privacy laws specifically related to health records, Lorian Hardcastle, an assistant law professor at the University of Calgary, said that they are outdated and need strengthening. As the healthcare system moves toward more electronic health records, often managed by private companies, Hardcastle said updates are needed to better protect patient information. And this is a quote from Hardcastle, quote, "Data being managed not on paper but by third-party entities really demands that policymakers rethink this legislation that was created decades ago when it was still paper records sitting in a doctor's office," unquote. Some of the current laws do little to protect patient data from changing hands if personal identifiers have been removed, Hardcastle said. Another quote from Hardcastle, quote, "If the data has been de-identified and it's not reasonable that re-identification would be possible, the law offers quite little protection. Unfortunately, though, what we thought 10 years ago was de-identified data, now we're realizing that big data with AI can be re-identified," unquote. In a statement, the Office of the Ontario Privacy Commissioner said health information custodians have to take reasonable steps to ensure data is protected and secure, and acknowledged health data has become an increasingly valuable commodity. A quote from this statement says, quote, "There needs to be greater accountability around the use and sale of de-identified health data and what happens to that data after it's sold," unquote. The office is advocating for changes to Ontario's privacy legislation to add further guardrails like risk assessments when personal health information is involved. For patients wondering what might be happening with their health data, Hardcastle said start by asking your clinic for its privacy policy. Beyond that, she said any issues can be reported to a privacy commissioner, and concerned patients can push legislators to update privacy laws. Honestly, it's really that last one that matters. I hate to say this, but I've almost given up on reading privacy policies. They're so hard to comprehend. The reading level is very high. It's full of gibberish. It's full of loopholes, frankly, because they're written by lawyers for the benefit of the company and not certainly for your benefit, regardless of the flowery text at the top that always begins with, "We take your privacy seriously," which reminds me of the classic sticker that I often see at hacker conferences that says, "We take your privacy, comma, seriously." In other words, we take your privacy. Anyway, this is disturbing, not surprising, because this data is worth a lot of money and these companies like making lots of money, and they supposedly are de-identifying this data. But as this article says, it's actually often trivially easy to re-identify some of this data, especially when we've got the modern tools we have today. When you start comparing it to other data sets and using AI, it doesn't take much to re-identify that data. So we need better privacy laws. We need ones that are updated to cover situations like this. And yes, I agree with this article that more than likely what the outcome of this could be better health outcomes, right? I mean, there's a lot of very rich data out there that could be used to improve drugs and make them more effective and have fewer side effects and those sorts of things. That's the kind of thing that big data might be able to help you with. But at the end of the day, these companies are about making money, and sometimes they're more about treating ongoing symptoms rather than curing the problem, because there's a lot less money in cures. Okay, that was very cynical. Next up, this is an article from Micah Lee, somebody that I've had on the show before and who I talk with fairly frequently, actually. A good guy, does great investigative work. And this is a report about one of the DOGE bros in the United States, of course. This is unofficial Department of Government Efficiency. There really is no such department. It's just a name they gave this group of people. It was put together and run by Elon Musk for some time, though supposedly he's stepping back. But it was a bunch of people, I think, from some of Elon's, software developers and IT people from Elon's other companies that he put together. It was really kind of a quickly done, not well thought out group doing just ridiculous things that should never have been allowed to happen. And there's a lot of speculation in this article, but nevertheless, it's an example of why this needs to be done in a much, much more careful way, especially when we're talking about national security and honestly, privacy. So anyway, here's an article from Micah. Kyle Schutt, S-H-U-T-T, I'm going to say Shoot. Carl Schutt is a 37-year-old DOGE software engineer, and he put DOGE software engineer in quotes. According to ProPublica, And it links to that article where I think ProPublica revealed a lot of the people that were on this DOGE team. They tried to keep it quiet. Anyway, in February, DropSite News reported that he gained access to FEMA's core financial management system. His computer was apparently compromised with malware because his email address and passwords have shown up in 4 separate Stealer log datasets, all of them published since late 2023, which means they were fairly recent. By searching for his personal Gmail address in Have I Been Pwned, the wonderful database from Troy Hunt, he appears in 51 data breaches in 5 pastes. And a paste, I think, in this case would be, I think he's referring to data stealer log sets. These include a 2013 breach of 153 million Adobe users, a 2016 breach of 164 million LinkedIn users, and a 2020 breach of 167 million users from Gravatar, and a 2024 breach of the conservative news site The Post Millennial, and many more. Being included in a data breach doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Definitely not. It just means a website you were using was hacked. Though 51 different data breaches is particularly impressive. Everyone who has ever used the internet is included in data breaches. But some of the datasets that Shoot is included in are much more concerning than normal data breaches because they're from Stealer logs. Stealer logs are collections of URLs paired with usernames and passwords compiled with the help of malware. If malware infects your device, it can do things like log your keystrokes or record everything entered into forms in your web browser, building a list of your usernames and passwords for various websites, and then send this data back to the person who controls the malware. This is where Stealer log data comes from. I have no way of knowing exactly when Shoot's computer was hacked or how many times. I don't know nearly enough about the origins of these Stealer log datasets. He might have gotten hacked years ago and the Stealer log datasets were just published recently. But he also might have gotten hacked within the last few months. There's a good chance that DOGE staff are using dedicated work devices. That would be smart because if Shoot's personal computer has malware on it, at least he wouldn't be using it for his DOGE work. On the other hand, DOGE is run by an incompetent idiot, and he's talking about Elon Musk there, I think. So there's a good chance that the DOGE staff have been using their personal computers. In Shoot's case, maybe his personal computer that's infected by malware, recording all of the usernames and passwords he types in. Here are the Stealer log datasets that Shoot's email address was found in, with descriptions of each dataset, along with links to blog posts explaining them in more detail from Have I Been Pwned. Okay, so the article goes on to list these Stealer log datasets that this person's been collected in. But basically, what Micah has found from this data that he's got from resources, and he has several, I'm sure, is that one of the DOGE software engineers that has been given high-level access to many U.S. critical databases and systems has apparently been hacked, and perhaps multiple times. Is this person using that hacked laptop to do the work? We don't know. But we should know, and we don't. And that is also a problem. This is why we have protocols for security. This is why people get vetted. This is why people who get clearances have to go through background checks and get some minor investigations done. My understanding is that none of these people went through any of that. They were just immediately given clearances, allowed to access anything they wanted to get access to, and potentially were using their personal devices. I can't remember if I talked about this on the show, but somebody figured out that at one point they had put in a personal Starlink satellite receiver, which is Elon Musk's satellite-based internet service. They had installed a antenna of their own on top of one of these government buildings and run a cable down the side of the building and into a window, presumably to get internet access that was outside the normal government protected internet access. This is the kind of cowboy stuff these guys are up to, which is extremely dangerous. If I were a foreign intelligence service, I would be doubling my staff and working overtime to try to hack these guys' devices, blackmail them if possible, and see if I could get my hands on whatever data that these guys are exfiltrating from these databases. We haven't seen the outcome of this yet, and we may get lucky, but I think we're going to find out for the years to come that this is going to have caused serious, serious national security problems. All right, next up, this is a story from Jacobin, which is a site I usually do not quote, but I couldn't find, actually I did find the original source of this, but it was paywalled, and so I couldn't read it, so I'm using this version of this. and it appears to be a left-leaning site. I honestly know very little about it, but anyway, the article itself seems to be pretty straightforward. And it's talking about its service used by the airlines to collect a whole lot of data about everybody who's flying. And it turns out that they are sharing or selling data to government agencies. So I did not know about this agency. So that's one of the main reasons I'm talking about this. But then let me just read it, and then I'll say more. A massive aviation industry clearinghouse that processes data for 12 billion passenger flights per year is selling that information to the Trump administration amid the White House's new immigration crackdown, according to documents reviewed by The Lever. And that was the site that I couldn't get to because it was paywalled. The data, including, quote, full flight itineraries, passenger name records, and financial details, which are otherwise difficult or impossible to obtain, unquote, for past and future flights, is fed into a secretive government intelligence operations called the Travel Intelligence Program and provided to Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and other federal agencies, records reveal. Details of this program were outlined in procurement documents released Wednesday by ICE, which is a division of the Department of Homeland Security. Privacy and travel industry experts interviewed by The Lever said that law enforcement's access to such a vast database with little information on what privacy or other restrictions are in place raises serious civil liberties concerns. And this is a quote from Edward Hasbrook, a travel expert. Edward says, quote, "This is probably the single most significant aggregated repository of data about American air travelers. That the government has gotten access to it is a very big deal," unquote. When a passenger buys a flight through a travel agency, including via common online booking sites like Booking.com or Expedia, the transaction is fed through the Airlines Reporting Corporation, or ARC, which acts as an intermediary between travel agencies and airlines. So although most airline passengers have never heard of the ARC, there's a good chance that their data has, at some point, passed through the company. Its dataset includes information on 54% of all flights taken globally, according to the company's website. In a statement to The Lever, a spokesperson for the company said that the Travel Intelligence Program, quote, was established after September 11th terror attacks to provide certain data to law enforcement for the purpose of national security matters, unquote, and criminal investigations. The spokesperson declined to answer questions about whether clients outside the U.S. government have access to the data. The company is jointly owned by 9 major airlines, most of which are U.S.-based: Delta, Southwest, United, American Airlines, Alaska Airlines, JetBlue, Air Canada, Lufthansa, and Air France. But more than 200 airlines settled tickets through the ARC, giving the company unparalleled, comprehensive access to passenger data. The company claims to manage the database in partnership with the International Air Transport Association, the primary lobbying group for airlines. Consumer advocates have already been concerned about the monopoly the ARC has established over airline passenger data. Because no other comparable financial clearinghouse exists in aviation, there's no alternative for travel agencies or consumers to use instead. And this is a quote from Bill McGee, a senior fellow for aviation and travel at the American Economic Liberties Project, consumer watchdog. Quote, "The company has long had a virtual monopoly on processing airline bookings. Through this, ARC collects massive amounts of personal data on consumers, including information on finances, travel itineraries, and shopping patterns. To hear that ARC is now selling such personal information to the government is rather chilling," unquote. The Lever contacted each of the 9 airlines that are shareholders of the ARC for this story. United Airlines declined to comment, referring questions instead to the Department of Homeland Security. The others did not reply. The Airlines Reporting Corporation has for many years provided commercial access to high-level data, offering travel trend reports and transaction data for a price. But several experts interviewed by The Lever said they were completely unaware that the company was providing its data to the government. Another quote from Hasbrook, quote, "I have never seen government access to ARC, or even ARC itself, mentioned in an airline privacy policy or a travel agency policy. Never," unquote. Jay Stanley, a senior policy analyst focusing on privacy at the American Civil Liberties Union, said that the program appears to have been flown by and below the radar. Federal law enforcement has other ways to access flight data. Already, U.S. Customs and Border Protection demands that airlines hand over passenger records for every flight that passes through the United States, and there have been reports in the past of federal law enforcement, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI, accessing passenger data through travel agencies' reservation systems and other intermediaries. But the new documents indicate that the ARC provides data that federal law enforcement cannot obtain elsewhere. in the documents published to provide notice that ICE is entering into a no-bid contract with the company, officials write that the ARC database, quote, is the only company in the U.S. that provides this level of real-time travel data access to law enforcement, unquote. The ARC provides this data to ICE and Department of Homeland Security analysts through the Travel Intelligence Program, which is described in the documents as proprietary software. And a quote from the document, it says, the Travel Intelligence Program database holds over 1 billion records, spanning 39 months of past and future travel, an unparalleled intelligence resource. In this database, analysts gain unrestricted access to all sold ticket databases, enabling targeted searches by name or credit card number, unquote. And then one final quote here from McGee, quote, how will this information be used? What safeguards on privacy and personal rights will be in place? There are far too many unanswered questions, unquote. So yeah, there's a lot of unanswered questions here, but I mean, this comes back to personal privacy again, and when we should be allowing access to this data. We're going to talk a little bit later about license plate readers being used for law enforcement as well. I get that these are powerful tools. I get that these tools have a lot of potentially very useful information for people trying to find bad guys, but at what cost to privacy, to civil liberties, to freedom, right? We need to be making informed choices about this, which means there needs to be transparency, and there just is not transparency. I had never heard of this thing, though I'm not surprised such a thing exists. There's a lot of these background third parties that have virtual monopolies on collecting and routing data that you've never heard of and probably will never hear of. Data brokers know about these companies, and they contract with these companies to get this information. Law enforcement and government agencies apparently do too. And in a lot of cases, some of these companies are data brokers. So they insert themselves in these situations where they can have a massive amount of data about a particular subject, about lots and lots of people, and then they turn around and monetize that data in some other way. And it's just not well known or well understood. And it flourishes because we don't have any rules saying you can't do that. All right, next up, this is from Hacker News. And we've actually got some good news. A joint law enforcement operation undertaken by Dutch and U.S. authorities has dismantled a criminal proxy network that's powered by thousands of infected Internet of Things and end-of-life devices, and listing them into a botnet for providing anonymity to malicious actors. In conjunction with the domain seizure, Russian nationals, and they list a bunch of names, have been charged by the U.S. Department of Justice for operating, maintaining, and profiting from the proxy services. The DOJ noted that the users paid a monthly subscription fee ranging from $9.95 to $110 per month, netting the threat actors more than $46 million by selling access to the infected routers. The service is believed to have been available since 2004. It also said the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, found business and residential routers in Oklahoma that had been hacked to install malware without the user's knowledge. And this is a report from some tech lab. It says, quote, a weekly average of 1,000 unique bots in contact with the command and control infrastructure located in Turkey. Over half of these victims are in the United States, with Canada and Ecuador showing the next two highest totals, unquote. In an advisory issued by the FBI Thursday, the agency said the threat actors behind the botnets have exploited known security vulnerabilities in internet-exposed routers, which is most routers, to install malware that grants persistent remote access. The FBI also pointed out that the end-of-life routers have been compromised with a variant of the Moon malware, permitting the threat actors to install proxy software on the devices and help conduct cybercrimes anonymously. The Moon was first discovered by the SANS Technology Institute in 2014 in attacks targeting Linksys routers. This is a quote from the FBI, quote, the Moon does not require a password to infect routers. It scans for open ports and sends a command to a vulnerable script. The malware contacts the command and control server, and the command and control server responds with instructions, which may include instructing the infected machine to scan for other vulnerable routers to spread the infection and expand the network, unquote. When users purchase a proxy, this would be the bad guys, they receive an IP and port combination for connection. The service lacks any additional authentication once activated, making it ripe for abuse. It has been found that this network has been used to conduct ad fraud, distributed denial of service, and brute force attacks and exploit victims' data. To mitigate the risks posed by such proxy botnets, users are advised to regularly reboot their routers, install security updates, change default passwords, and upgrade to newer models once they reach end-of-life status. And this is another quote from that research company, quote, "Proxy services have and will continue to present a direct threat to internet security as they allow malicious actors to hide behind unsuspecting residential IPs, complicating detection by network monitoring tools. As a vast number of end-of-life devices remain in circulation and the world continues to adopt devices into the Internet of Things, there will continue to be a massive pool of targets for malicious actors," unquote. Okay, so we've talked about this in theory several times, and basically anything you put on the internet is a target. And now most of the things you have in your home are not directly connected to the internet. They're connected to your router, which is connected to the internet. So that is what's in play here. These routers, which are basically kind of the gateway between all the devices in your home network and the internet. The backside of those routers is what's logically exposed to the broader internet. And if it is an old device that is no longer getting security updates, or if you have not patched the software on your router and it has a known vulnerability that can be exploited from the WAN side, the wide area network or the internet side, there are bad guys out there with computers constantly scanning the internet looking for these devices so that they can subvert them and do exactly what these guys did. In this case, what they're doing is they compromise thousands of these routers, and then people, bad guys, subscribe to the service saying, hey, I need some sort of a proxy. I need some sort of a go-between to basically kind of launder my internet traffic. I want to send malicious traffic through somebody else's home router so it looks like it's coming from them, not me. And in some cases, and it sounds like this is one of them, the bad guys also directly use these routers, compromised home routers, to actually launch some of these distributed denial of service attacks as well. So the upshot is, please use a modern router, one that is probably no more than 5 or 6 years old, I'm thinking. You need a modern router with modern security, and you need to keep that software up to date. A lot of modern routers today will have an automatic update function, and you should make sure that you change the default administrator password on your router. While that should only be accessible from within your home network, if you ever manage to get a compromised device within your home network, and it's this kind of malware that likes to propagate itself, one of the things that's going to be looking for is, hey, does this guy's router have a default, well-known administrator password? And if so, use that to take over your router. Now, I did mention rebooting your router. That's because in a lot of cases, the kind of malware that gets installed on home routers is such that it doesn't really get persisted. It's not really like on a quote-unquote hard drive. So it's just in memory. So you could basically flush the memory by turning it off and turning it back on. I actually have my home router set to reboot once a week. So I'm glad they took this down. This sounds like it's been around a long time, but there are probably plenty more of these out there. And as long as we keep putting these vulnerable IoT devices in home routers and end-of-life devices on the internet, these people are still going to be in business. Maybe not these particular people, but people like them. All right, this next one is also from the Hacker News. And it's real short, but it's good. Google has agreed to pay the U.S. state of Texas nearly $1.4 billion to settle 2 lawsuits that accuse the company of tracking users' personal location and maintaining their facial recognition data without consent. The $1.375 billion payment dwarfs the fines the tech giant has paid to settle similar lawsuits brought by other U.S. states. In November of 2022, it paid $391 million to a group of 40 states. In January of 2023, it paid $29.5 million to Indiana and Washington. And later that September, it forked over another $93 million to settle with California. So this is really quite large. The case, originally filed in 2022, related to unlawful tracking and collection of user data regarding geolocation, incognito searches, and biometric data, tracking users' whereabouts even when the location history setting was disabled, and collecting the biometric data without informed consent. And this is a quote from Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Quote, "For years, Google secretly tracked people's movements, private searches, and even their voice prints and facial geometry through their products and services. This $1.375 billion settlement is a major win for Texans' privacy and tells companies that they will pay for abusing our trust," unquote. Last year, Google announced plans to store Maps timeline data locally on users' devices instead of on their Google accounts. The company has also rolled out other privacy controls that allows users to auto-delete location information when the location history setting is enabled. The payment also rivals a $1.4 billion fine that Meta paid Texas to settle a lawsuit over allegations that it illegally collected the biometric data of millions of users without their permission. The development comes at a time when Google is the subject of intense regulatory scrutiny on both sides of the Atlantic, facing calls to break up parts of its business to satisfy antitrust concerns. All right, I don't have a lot to add to that, but this is a pretty big fine. This is big enough that I would think Google would notice. Though, honestly, they still make so much money. They could certainly write this off as a cost of doing business. However, if other states keep suing for things like this, then hopefully, they will bring them to heel and and stop with some of these bad practices. Next up is a rare local story. This is from 9 News in Denver, and it's about automated license plate readers, which we've talked about on the show several times. And it's another success story. It's more good news. Denver will stop using its automatic license plate reader cameras after every city council member voted against a contract extension with Flock. And Flock was the company we talked about when we talked about ALPRs. They voiced concerns about data security and potential immigration enforcement access. Flock camera data is accessible to more than 80 law enforcement agencies, some of which have committed to cooperating with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. The $666,000 contract extension would have allowed the Denver police to keep operating 111 cameras at about 70 intersections across Denver for another 2 years. The cameras were installed last year to combat Denver's high rate of car thefts. They even helped police solve a jewelry heist back in April. Denver Mayor Mike Johnston's office asked City Council to vote down the contract Monday night. While they noted the cameras did contribute to a 40% drop in car thefts, they also recognized the community is worried about privacy and security concerns. And this is a quote from the mayor's office, quote, "We acknowledge that today's environment is much different than when the pilot began in early 2024, and there are new community concerns surrounding this technology," unquote. Multiple council members spoke out specifically on immigration concerns. This is a quote from Sarah Parody, one of the council members, quote, "We're living in an era where just this week, actually an executive order came out instructing the Department of Justice and the FBI to look for reasons to prosecute local elected officials and activists who they believe are quote-unquote obstructing ICE enforcement. This kind of surveillance technology is a gift if you have that kind of ill intent, and the federal government has that ill intent right now," unquote. But just last month, council members heard from Denver police and the district attorney's office about how helpful the cameras are at helping to solve crimes. And this is from a Denver police sergeant, quote, "This Flock has been a great tool for all of us. It's a wonderful tool, not only for us, but for the victims," unquote. Denver police said the cameras have led to 275 arrests, 180 recovered stolen vehicles, and helped solve everything from homicides to shootings to multi-million-dollar jewelry heists. This is a quote from an assistant DA. Quote, "The system has really been invaluable to helping us build cases, both related to auto theft and more broadly," unquote. But that wasn't enough to convince council members that the public safety benefits outweighed the threat of ICE getting their hands on tracking information. Parody also noted on Monday that while the Denver Police Department does work with ICE agents, departments like the El Paso County Sheriff are not subject to sanctuary city policies and have reaffirmed their commitment to cooperate with the federal enforcement. Her concerns were echoed by her colleagues. Another one of the council members, Chris Hines, said, quote, "I want to know more about what information is shared, who can see this information, how it is used, and who it is protected from. In a time when many of our immigrant communities, among others, are fearful, we must do better until we can ensure full public transparency. Strict limits on data access and meaningful oversights cannot support this contract." That sounds weird. Maybe that was cut off there. "Public safety must never come at the cost of civil liberties," unquote. The city will continue its pilot with the Flock cameras, but won't be renewing the contract. The mayor's office said it plans to form a task force to examine broad issues of technology and security, implementation, and to address privacy and security concerns. The mayor's office said they are not against using the cameras in the future. They're just worried about the information being shared with ICE. So yeah, this is a tricky subject. Obviously, this sort of surveillance can certainly help law enforcement solve crimes. So would everybody wearing a body camera with and recording everything you ever do or say in every place you go. there's a line to be drawn somewhere, and we've got to figure out where that line is. But then you've also got to take into account how else might this data that's being collected be used. Obviously, in this case, they are worried not so much about the data collected for the program itself, but for the program being used by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. But pick your government agency you don't like. Or for that matter, think of what hackers could do with this information in the wrong hands, or foreign governments. If we do collect this information, we have to be able to protect it, and we've got to be able to limit who has access to it. All right, one more quick article, then it's time for the tip of the week. And this one comes from Ars Technica, and it's one more bit of good news. A jury has awarded WhatsApp $167 million in punitive damages in a case the company brought against Israel-based NSO Group for exploiting a software vulnerability that hijacked the phones of thousands of users. The verdict, reached Tuesday, comes as a major victory not just for Meta-owned WhatsApp, but also for privacy and security rights advocates who have long criticized the practices of NSO and other exploit sellers. The jury also awarded WhatsApp $440 million in compensatory damages. WhatsApp sued NSO in 2019 for an attack that targeted roughly 1,400 mobile phones belonging to attorneys, journalists, human rights activists, political dissidents, diplomats, and senior foreign government officials. NSO, which works on behalf of governments and law enforcement authorities in various countries, exploited a critical WhatsApp vulnerability that allowed it to install NSO's proprietary spyware Pegasus on iOS and Android devices. The clickless exploit worked by placing a call to a target's app. The target did not have to answer the call to be infected. NSO created WhatsApp accounts in 2018 and used them a year later to initiate calls that exploited the critical vulnerability on phones, which, among others, included 100 members of quote-unquote civil society from 20 countries, according to an investigation research group Citizen Lab performed on behalf of WhatsApp. And Citizen Lab's done some great work. The calls passed through WhatsApp servers and injected malicious code into the memory of targeted devices. The targeted phones would then use the WhatsApp servers to connect to malicious servers maintained by NSO. After discovering the attack, WhatsApp shut them down with a software update that patched the critical vulnerability and notified target customers that their devices had been hacked. In the weeks following, Facebook and WhatsApp also kicked NSO employees off their platforms. WhatsApp's lawsuit was unprecedented at the time because it was among the first to take aim at the unregulated industry selling sophisticated malware services to governments around the world. NSO argued that it should be immune from such legal actions because it sold tools solely to licensed government intelligence and law enforcement agencies for use in fighting terrorism, child sex abuse, and other serious crimes. The company said it barred customers from using the tools against human rights activists, journalists, and dissidents. NSO also said it acted as a check against strongly encrypted platforms that could be used as a haven for criminals. Tuesday's verdict from a jury impaneled by the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California is a sharp rebuke of NSO's defense. And this is a quote from John Scott Railton from Citizen Lab, quote, "Turns out regular people don't like companies that help dictators hack dissidents. NSO had all the fancy legal arguments and all the PR spin. But when their conduct got laid bare, the jury sent a massive Monsanto-style punitive damages signal. Other spyware companies, you may be next," unquote. Besides setting a possible precedent for hacking victims and their technology providers, WhatsApp's suit exposed NSO practices the company had long tried to keep secret. Last year, the judge hearing the case ordered NSO to reveal some of the source code that makes its products work. The litigation also exposed who some of NSO's customers were and the location of many of the targeted WhatsApp users. So this is a big deal, and this is a really fantastic victory for privacy. And you can see that these companies argue that we're only giving this to the good guys, and we're only letting them use it for good purposes. Who gets to define good purposes and good people? Governments. Agencies, and obviously it has been abused. And we don't know how hard NSO tried to keep companies from abusing this, but from other articles I've read about their behavior, this is not at all surprising to me. So I'm really glad to see that they were held to account. It doesn't mention anything in here about an appeal, so hopefully this is the final word on this particular story. And you know what? Let's hope that more research gets done and they get sued by other people as well, because obviously their tools are being used for way more than just trying to catch the bad guys. All right, now it's time for our tip of the week. And this is going to be a quick one. It's part of my series of what I'm calling Dragon Hacks, kind of like life hacks, but Dragon Hacks. Anyway, these are quick and easy things, quick wins that should take you almost no time to complete, or as little as possible, and yet move the ball forward on privacy and security. And I call this one Slay Snoopers, or Slay Messenger Snoopers. There's a whole bunch of messaging apps out there, Facebook Messenger, Telegram, WhatsApp, WeChat, Teams, Slack, Discord. There's a ton of them, and they're all proprietary, and because they all want to keep your attention, and they all want to be able to show you ads or mine your data or both. And we've got this horribly fractured state where if you want to talk to somebody else on Facebook Messenger, you have to also be using Facebook Messenger. And it's a really sad state of affairs. Text messaging is still the lowest common denominator, but text messaging, old school text messaging anyway, is very insecure. iMessage from Apple, as long as you're staying between Apple users, is actually quite good in terms of end-to-end encryption. But as soon as you add somebody to the group chat who's got an Android phone, that all goes out the window. Now, there is this new thing called RCS. It's kind of like text messaging 2.0. It is not currently end-to-end encrypted, but Apple and Google are working on making that the case. Once we get there, that will be a much better common format that will allow you to talk to anybody without having to have the same type of messenger app. But we like our messenger apps for other reasons too. But they are just really not secure or that private. Even the ones that have ostensibly end-to-end encryption, you can't trust the people running the app. It's only encrypted between the ends. At the ends, when you're running the software by the company who makes the app, they can see all your messages, and they are probably in some way, shape, or form using that information to monetize your data somehow. Now, you'd have to dig through their privacy policies to try to figure out what it is they're doing, but they change all the time, and those things are worded so horribly, it's really impossible to know what they're doing. So what is someone to do about that? Well, use Signal. Just use Signal. Download it, install it on your phone, sign up for an account, and find one other person to do this with you, because it takes two to tango. You're going to need someone else to talk to. Get yourself a Signal buddy. Download the Signal app, install it on your phone. It needs to be on your phone first. Everything is tied to your phone, and to that particular phone, by the way. You can move it to a new phone. If you get a new phone, you can actually swap the account and move the account over. That's fine. However, if you lose your phone, that's a different story. It's a process. You actually have to transfer from phone to phone. So, these are some of the downsides to using a truly secure app. But once you do have it on your phone, you can also install the corresponding computer desktop app for Mac or PC, or on your tablet as well. And then you just synchronize it by scanning a QR code from your phone. And everything gets synchronized, and it works great. It's really, really come a long way. Signal's a great app. If you're tired of the whole group chat with the green bubbles and the blue bubbles, and I don't know about you, but I've got a big group chat with some friends that have some older Android phones, and it really screws up the chat. Like when people start doing emoji responses to things and some of the more advanced features that it just cannot be sorted out with some of these older devices. So this gets past all the green bubble, blue bubble crap. Everyone's on Signal. It's guaranteed end-to-end encrypted. It's really, really strong. The whole Signal Gate thing with the folks in the Trump administration, the problem there was not Signal. The problem there was that they were using these on their personal devices, which were probably highly targeted by foreign intelligence services. And that is not an approved way to send classified information. Even though the app itself is secure, the devices themselves are highly, highly targeted. Unlike you and I, our phones are not likely to be targeted by nation-state governments trying to figure out what we're saying. So anyway, honestly, by the time I said everything I just said, you could have already downloaded and installed Signal. Just give it a try. Find yourself a buddy, two people to try it with, give it a shot, play with all the features. By the way, Signal also does voice and video calls. Again, end-to-end encrypted, and can do group voice and video calls. They have emoji responses and all the usual stuff that most apps have. So check that out. I've got an article on Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. You can also find that in the show notes. kind of pressed for time this week, so I'm going to have to leave it at that. But if you want links to click on to get these apps and things like that, just go to the show notes, find the article, or go to firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. Probably the first article there. And of course, if you're a newsletter subscriber, it's already sitting, waiting for you right now in your inbox. All right, everybody, there you go. There's your abbreviated news and your tip of the week. All right, everybody, that's going to do it this week. Don't have time for a whole lot of extra info here at the end. Again, I'm on vacation as you hear this, and I'm getting ready to go on vacation as I record this. But all the podcasts while I'm gone have been pre-scheduled. There should be no interruption there. If for some reason there is or something weird happens, then you will know why. Next week, I've got an interview queued up with Carl Dong, the founder of an interesting new VPN service called Obscura. We have a good talk about a very particular thing that their VPN does that most other ones that I know of do not. And then after that, I will have a new show where I will catch up on anything I missed while I was gone. All right, that's it. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next time, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.